Hi all, welcome back to video 5 of unit 3. So we just got through all that microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscle, and now we're going to start putting it together to be able to understand muscle contraction. Alright, so the first thing that we talked about was this myosin head being in the high energy configuration. So we've already talked about that. We know that we have these things called Z-lines, the end of the sarcomeres, so you can say when they're in the high energy configuration, it's pointed towards the Z-line. If I had another Z-line over here, then on this side of the tail or on another tail facing this direction, I would have a head pointed that way. So, let's get a new picture. Boom, thin, 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 thick, head oriented in high energy configuration towards the thin myofilaments, towards the Z-line. Alright, we mentioned back here in this slide, we have calcium coming in binding to troponin C. And when troponin C is bound to calcium, it causes troponin I to let go of actin. And this whole troponin-tropomyosin complex slides out, moves over, exposes this myosin binding site. So then our myosin head, and let me give you guys some clearer words. So we're going to start with the myosin in its high energy configuration. We know that calcium is going to bind to troponin-tropomyosin complex, specifically troponin C, which causes troponin I to let go of actin, and this whole complex is going to slide out of the way. And because of this, we get the exposure of that myosin binding site. Our charged myosin can then grab, so myosin head, it's gonna reach up and bind to, so myosin reaches and binds to actin. Remember, actin has a myosin binding site, and myosin has an actin binding site. So these things meet, and this is called a cross bridge. And then our myosin is going to go from a low energy configuration and pull inwards and pull that thin myofilament from the Z-line towards the M-line in a motion that we call the power stroke. So this changing of configuration from high energy to low energy configuration is called a power stroke. Okay, so then we do a power stroke. And the next thing that we have, remember, we have this myosin is bound to actin. Okay, we know that. Myosin is bound to actin at this actin binding site. We know that myosin has another binding site for ATP. So ATP binds to myosin, and that's going to inhibit the actin binding site. So in my last picture, I've changed this conformation. I've changed this conformation. I've moved my thin myofilament inwards, and now I'm going to attach ATP to this. When I attach ATP, it lets go of that actin, because whenever my ATP binding site is filled with ATP, then my actin binding site is disabled. Now, this is ATP, this isn't ADP. I split my ATP into ADP plus a phosphate plus energy. I can use this energy to make this go from the low energy configuration to the high energy configuration. Now that this isn't filled with ATP, it's filled with ADP and phosphate. That means that this active actin binding site gets exposed again. And since I'm in this high energy configuration, I can and I have exposure of this binding site, I can reach up and bind and grab. So basically what keeps happening, you'll have high energy, pulls it in, low energy. ATP binds, lets go, ATP splits into ADP plus a phosphate, and then this energy can then be used to turn this back in to its high energy configuration. As long as calcium's still present, bound to that troponin C, that means the troponin-tropomyosin complex isn't in the way, and then I can reinitiate this action. So my myosin head will reach up, it will grab, it will do a power stroke, it will then be in its low energy configuration. ATP can then bind to that open active site. It will disable that actin binding site. I'll split my ATP into ADP plus a phosphate plus some energy. I can use that energy to put myself back into the high energy configuration. As long as calcium's present, I can reach up and grab that actin or thin myofilament and pull it towards the M line with the power stroke. I'll then be in my low energy configuration. ATP can come and bind. It will then let go. I can take that ATP and split it into ADP plus a phosphate plus energy. I can use that energy to then put me back into high energy configuration. So the whole point is a repetitive process. What do you need present to keep this process going? You need ATP and you need calcium. So muscle contraction will continue as long as calcium and ATP are present. Calcium is necessary to expose that myosin binding site on actin so the head can come up and grab it. And then you need this ATP to let go as well as split. You need the ATP to let go of the actin, and then you have to split that ATP to reset into this high energy configuration and repeat the process. Okay. So all of this myosin high energy through this pulling and resetting into the configuration, this is all called the sliding filament theory of contraction. So sliding filament theory, because these myofilaments, this myosin and actin, are sliding over each other. But the question that you might be asking yourself is, you say, okay, this is all good, this sounds great, but where am I getting this calcium from? So now we have to take a step back. We were looking deep into this and we saw these sarcomeres, but we got to take a step back and go back to the myofibril, because we know that the myofibril is surrounded in this stuff called sarcoplasmic reticulum, and this is where we're getting our calcium. So now the question that you might be asking yourself is, well, how do we get the sarcoplasmic reticulum that has this stored calcium to release the calcium that can then bind to the troponin-tropomyosin complex and get this sliding filament thing going? So what we have to look at is, how do we get calcium released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum? What that's going to come from is a phenomenon called excitation-contraction coupling.